Playing soldier behind a desk in air conditioning isn't a real deployment, Victoria. You basically had an all-expenses-paid vacation while the real men did the heavy lifting. My brother-in-law, Derek, smirked across the crowded anniversary dinner table, swirling his wine like he'd just delivered a knockout punch. My sister looked down at her plate, silent. The rest of the family chuckled uncomfortably, assuming I'd just smile, nod, and let him walk all over me like I always had since returning home. I didn't utter a single word. I simply took a slow sip of water. Then the restaurant's heavy oak doors swung open. A full bird colonel in formal army dress blues entered, medals gleaming under the chandeliers. He locked eyes with our table, marched straight toward us with parade ground precision, stopped at the edge of Derek's chair, snapped to crisp attention and rendered a sharp salute. "Commander on deck, ma'am. My name is Victoria Cross." At 28 years old, I had spent the better part of a decade existing in worlds most people only ever see on the news or in high-budget films. 3 months ago, I finally hung up my combat uniform and transitioned into civilian life, trading the roar of helicopter turbines and austere forward operating bases for quiet suburban streets and business-casual attire. Tonight was supposed to be a peaceful milestone, my parents' 35th wedding anniversary at the Grandview, an upscale restaurant downtown with white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and entrees that cost more than a field uniform. The entire family was gathered around the corner table, but the atmosphere was completely dominated by one person. Derek, my brother-in-law. Derek was a 34-year-old senior consultant at a commercial logistics firm, and he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone within earshot of his self-proclaimed brilliance. He wore tailored suits to casual backyard barbecues, name-dropped clients who barely knew him, and treated every family dinner like a competitive boardroom presentation where he held all the shares. Ever since I came home, Derek had made my military service his favorite target. In his mind, my reluctance to boast or tell war stories was proof that I had simply spent my active duty hiding behind a desk. Between bites of his steak, Derek leaned back, smirked, and tapped his fork against his water glass to claim the room's attention. He looked straight at me, his eyes gleaming with rehearsed arrogance, ready to turn my quiet past into his personal punchline once again. The table went instantly quiet, waiting for whatever condescending lecture he had spent the afternoon preparing. I didn't take the bait. I simply picked up my water glass, took a slow sip and let the quiet stretch between us. When you spend years in the cockpit of a rotary-wing aircraft flying tactical operations under night vision goggles, you learn very quickly that the loudest person in the room is usually the most fragile. True strength is quiet. Real authority doesn't need a microphone or a captive dinner audience to validate its existence. Derek assumed my silence was submission. To him, my service was just a vague 2-line bullet point on a resume, something easily dismissed as administrative paperwork or air-conditioned safe zone filing. He had convinced himself and was trying to convince the rest of the family that he was the only person at the table who understood real-world pressure, leadership, and high-stakes decision-making. He didn't know the truth. None of them did because I had intentionally chosen not to burden them with it. I wasn't a paper pusher. For nearly 4 years, I had served as an Army Aviation Mission Commander and Special Operations Liaison, coordinating complex multi-branch extraction protocols and leading flight crews through zero-visibility combat zones. I had carried the lives of dozens of soldiers on my shoulders, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between an entire unit coming home or not. Derek had never faced anything more dangerous than a delayed quarterly earnings call, yet he sat there acting as if he owned the concept of grit. My sister Claire shifted uncomfortably beside him, staring down at her napkin, while my parents traded uneasy glances. Derek grinned wider, clearly mistaking my calm composure for defeat, fully expecting me to back down like I always did to keep the peace. Derek opened his mouth to deliver another self-satisfied jab, but the heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open with a resounding thud. The low hum of conversation across the restaurant evaporated almost instantly. Walking through the foyer was an active-duty Army officer in crisp, tailored dress blues. He wore the polished silver eagle of a full bird colonel on his shoulder epaulettes, his chest covered in rows of campaign ribbons, airborne wings, and master aviator badges that caught the warm glow of the chandeliers. His bearing was rigid, commanding, and carved from decades of discipline. Every head in the dining room turned to track his movements. Derek immediately sat up straight, adjusting the lapels of his suit with a smug grin. He loved proximity to authority, especially when he thought he could use it to elevate his own status in front of the family. "Watch this," Derek whispered loudly across the table, leaning forward. "That's high-level military brass. My firm is bidding on defense logistics contracts this quarter. I should go introduce myself and talk shop." Before anyone could tell him to sit down, Derek raised a hand and began clearing his throat, intending to flag the senior officer down as if he were summoning a waiter. The colonel didn't look left or right. He scanned the dining room with sharp, practiced eyes until his gaze locked directly onto our corner booth. His boots clicked against the hardwood floor with deliberate, rhythmic precision. Derek puffed out his chest, preparing to extend a welcoming handshake, convinced the officer had noticed him. But Colonel Marcus Harrison didn't spare Derek a second glance. He stepped right past Derek's outstretched arm, came to a dead halt at my side, snapped to rigid attention, and brought his hand up into a razor-sharp salute. "Commander on deck, ma'am." Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the silence of the dining room with absolute authority. Derek's hand remained frozen midair, his smug grin melting into a mask of pure shock. Beside him, my father set down his fork, while my mother's eyes went wide with disbelief. The entire table stared, completely paralyzed. I set my water glass down, stood up smoothly, and returned the salute with the effortless instinct that only years of field service could forge. "At ease, Colonel." "Good to see you, Marcus." Colonel Harrison dropped his hand, his rigid posture relaxing just a fraction into warm, genuine respect. "Apologies for interrupting your family dinner, Major Cross. Your liaison office informed me you'd be here, and given the timeline, this couldn't wait until Monday morning." He reached inside his formal jacket and pulled out a heavy crimson leather binder embossed with the gold seal of the Department of Defense. "The Joint Special Operations Evaluation Board completed their final review this afternoon," Harrison continued, holding out the portfolio. "The Chief of Staff personally signed off on your meritorious service citation for your Tactical Air Command during Operation Nightfall. Your detachment's precision extraction under direct fire brought 42 service members home safely." Derek flinched as if he'd been physically struck. His mouth opened slightly but no words came out. "They also approved your appointment as the Senior Advisory Director for Regional Defense Infrastructure," Harrison added, his deep voice carrying clearly across our table. "You officially lead the Civilian Oversight Board starting next month, Major." "Thank you, Colonel," I replied, taking the portfolio. "I appreciate you delivering this in person." "You earned every page of it, ma'am," Harrison said firmly, casting a brief, neutral glance across the frozen faces of my family. "Our pilots owe you their lives. It was an honor to serve under your operational command." Derek's face had drained of all color, transitioning from arrogant smugness to an ashen, hollow pale. The sheer weight of the colonel's words hung over the table like a lead weight. Desperate to salvage whatever shred of pride he had left, Derek cleared his throat loudly, stood up and forced a stiff, nervous chuckle. "Well, that's certainly impressive, Colonel," Derek said, his voice cracking slightly before he managed to steady it. He thrust his hand forward once more, leaning across the table. "I'm Derek Sterling, Senior Partner at Apex Global Logistics. My firm consults directly on regional military transport bids. We actually just submitted a proposal for the upcoming Midwest defense sector overhaul." Colonel Harrison turned his head slowly, looking down at Derek's outstretched hand for a long, quiet second before finally making eye contact. He didn't take the hand. "Apex Global?" Harrison repeated, his brow furrowing with recognition. "Yes, I'm familiar with your company's application. You're one of 5 private contractors competing for the 3-year logistics audit." Derek beamed, a desperate spark of validation returning to his eyes. "Exactly, sir. We pride ourselves on operational excellence, top-tier leadership and strict fiscal discipline. I oversee the primary analytical review myself." "Then you should know how the procurement process works, Mr. Sterling," Harrison replied evenly, his tone razor-sharp and utterly professional. "Because every single commercial bid in that sector, including your firm's subcontract allocations and compliance clearances, goes through direct vetting before final approval." The colonel turned his gaze back to me, giving a respectful nod. "Major Cross has been appointed as the chairperson of that evaluation committee. In fact, she holds sole veto authority over every corporate logistics contract awarded in this region. Derek froze solid. The blood drained completely from his lips as the full, catastrophic reality crashed down upon him. The woman whose service he had just mocked, the sister-in-law he had dismissed as an irrelevant desk clerk, held his entire firm's multimillion-dollar future in the palm of her hand. "Thank you for stopping by, Colonel Harrison," I said smoothly, breaking the suffocating stillness at our table. "I'll review the briefing documents tonight and see you at headquarters on Monday." "Understood, Major." "Enjoy your evening," Harrison replied. He gave a crisp nod, pivoted with military precision and marched out of the restaurant, his dress blues disappearing past the heavy double doors. A dead silence fell over our table. Derek slumped back down into his leather chair as if all the bones in his body had turned to liquid. His arm dangled uselessly against his side, his face bright red with humiliation and panic. Across the table, my sister Claire stared at me with wide, stunned eyes, while my parents sat frozen, looking between me and the gold-sealed crimson binder resting on the white linen. "Victoria." Derek stammered, his arrogant, commanding tone completely vanished. His voice shook like a frightened child's. "I had no idea. You never said anything about Flight Command or the advisory board. I was just joking earlier, you know that, right? Just a bit of family teasing." I picked up my water glass, took another slow sip and set it down without making a sound. Then I locked eyes with him. "You weren't joking, Derek," I said calmly, my tone steady and quiet enough that only our table could hear. "You spent months trying to diminish something you know nothing about, just to make yourself feel important at a dinner table. In the military, we don't advertise our titles or brag about our sacrifices. We let our actions speak for us." I leaned in slightly, holding his trembling gaze. "Your firm will receive a completely fair, objective audit on Monday based strictly on merit and compliance. But if you ever disrespect my service or use this family to feed your ego again, you and I will have a very different conversation." Derek swallowed hard and nodded rapidly, unable to look me in the eye. For the first time all night he didn't say a single word. The rest of that anniversary dinner passed in thoughtful, quiet reverence. My father raised his glass to my parents' marriage and quietly toasted to my safe return, his eyes shining with a deep, unspoken pride he hadn't known how to express before. My sister Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand, offering an apologetic, grateful smile. Derek spent the remaining 2 hours staring silently at his untouched plate, murmuring polite pleasantries only when directly spoken to, his grand corporate swagger entirely dismantled. When Monday morning arrived, I walked into the regional headquarters building wearing a tailored civilian suit, taking my seat at the head of the Procurement Oversight Board. Apex Global's proposal came across my desk during the afternoon session. True to my word, I didn't let personal feelings cloud my judgment. I reviewed the numbers with the same cold, meticulous discipline I'd used to calculate fuel reserves and tactical flight trajectories over hostile terrain. Their logistics model had several severe compliance oversights that Derek had evidently overlooked in his rush to impress the board. I sent the contract back with a comprehensive list of required revisions, forcing his firm to undergo a rigorous, 6-month restructuring before they could even qualify for a rebid. Derek never bragged at a family gathering again. In fact, at every subsequent dinner he arrived early, helped my mother carry groceries, and treated everyone at the table with genuine, careful humility. People who feel the need to boast about their power usually have very little of it. Real competence, real leadership, and real sacrifice do not require an audience or a loud voice to prove their worth. When you know who you are, what you've built, and what you've survived, you never have to shout to be heard. You just let the work stand for itself. Because at the end of the day, true strength isn't about proving yourself to the room. It's about having the quiet confidence to let the truth speak when it matters most.